So the question is this: should you be clipping your master fader when mixing or mastering your tracks? And also, what do I think about match EQ? Is it useful or is it a complete waste of time? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode 33. Let's get this show on the road. So before we dive into this excellent group of questions submitted by my loyal subscribers, I just want to let you know that if you're looking to improve the sound of your mixes and your productions, you must keep in mind that so much of your results comes down to how well you understand basic EQ and compression. And because of this, I'm offering you direct access for absolutely free to my crisp and clear heavy mix formula. The heavy mix formula is comprised of three main components: an EQ and compression mixing cheat sheet that you could refer to at any time when mixing your projects. Within the PDF, there are clickable links to private mixing tutorials for each of the main instruments within a heavy production. And along with each tutorial, there is a multi-track download, so you could download the exact same tracks that I'm mixing, so you could practice your mixing and mix along with me. The crisp and clear heavy mix formula is absolutely free, and you could have direct access right now by clicking the link in this video's description. Without any further ado, let's jump into this excellent group of questions submitted by my loyal subscribers. And question number one comes from Mirko. Hey Bobby, I have a question for you. What is your approach to miking a snare drum? I have a nicely tuned snare that sounds massive in the room, but when I play my drum tracks back, it sounds hollow and lifeless. Cheers, Mirko. Okay, well Mirko, this is an excellent question, and I have a very simple approach to miking snare drum. I use an SM57 on the snare top and an SM57 on the snare bottom. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be an SM57, especially when it comes to the snare bottom track. But the secret for me is to not skip the snare bottom track. So much of a snare drum, actually 50% of the snare sound, when you think about it, even when listening to a snare drum in the room, is the sizzle that comes from the bottom of the snare. So a lot of times people will mic the top of the snare and skip the bottom of the snare and wonder why their snare does not sound like how it sounds in the room in their productions. Another thing to keep in mind is it's very useful to use room mics on your kit, even if you're recording in a small room, because a lot of the ambience of your snare that you're used to hearing when playing your drums or listening to a drummer in a room is coming from the ambience of the room itself. So again, remember, these are just spot mics. This is just an isolated sound. It's the combination of multiple mics that gives you the resulting drum sound, even if you're looking for a specific snare sound. Because remember, the snare sound is not only coming from the snare mic, it's coming from the room itself. But super simple, just mic the top, mic the bottom. Again, I am not really obsessed about the exact microphone that I'm using. I'm more about the mic placement. And when it comes to placement, it's simple. Snare top, pretty close, about an inch or two above the rim. It's snare bottom, about an inch or two away from the snare wire. So hopefully this answers your question, and let me know how it works out for you. Okay, question number two comes from Mr. Sergio. Hey Bobby, I have a submission for your VQA series. What do you think of match EQing? The FabFilter Pro Q is a plugin with this feature that I've seen people use on metal guitars for tone matching, for example. A big learning curve on my part was realizing that it isn't productive to attempt cloning a reference mix. Ah, very true. So I go into projects now seeking unique tones, albeit up to a certain standard of quality. Are there other uses for match EQing? Thank you for your awesome videos. Well, Sergio, this is a great question, and I'm only gonna give you my own personal opinion based on my own personal experience. I really don't use match EQing. I'm kind of old school. I prefer to just mix using basic compression and EQ, because what I've learned through years upon years upon years of doing this is keeping it simple usually produces the best results based on my internships and working alongside other pros. Now, one exception here is if I'm stuck mixing a track where I do not have access to DI tracks for the guitars, and maybe the tone is not that great. Once in a blue moon, and I mean this is like 1 out of 100 mixes, I might use match EQing to try and salvage a very poorly recorded guitar tone. But you know, this is only a band-aid on a gaping wound, and I rarely do this. And for me, that's the only time I'll use match EQ, because at the end of the day, you are correct. You cannot copy someone else's mix. There's a reason why all the great mixers out there sound like themselves, and that's because we can only sound like ourselves, or the best version of ourselves. So again, that's just my opinion. Maybe there are others that are, achieving great results with match EQing, but I haven't really met anyone that uses match EQing in the way that you're asking. I've only used it to salvage tones, like I've mentioned, and that's only in extreme cases. So hopefully that answers your question and points you in the right direction, and thank you for your question. Bum, 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 bum. Okay, our third question here comes from Mr. Alessandro. Hey Bobby, slowly my mixes sound better and better and I'm very happy. Thanks to your course and your YouTube channel, I learned a lot. I wanted to ask you please a technical question. I see a lot of metal producers who during the mastering stage put the bass in mono below a certain frequency, like 80 Hertz. I know that this operation is used for vinyls or EDM or for mono compatibility purposes, but I wanted to know if this has a real usefulness or not. I'm trying to experiment with this, but the bass loses a lot of impact. Probably many inexperienced people like me are curious about this. What do you think about it? Thanks a lot, Alessandro. Okay, well, Alessandro, this is an excellent question. And again, much like with the last question, I do not pan my sub-frequencies in the middle in post, meaning in mastering. I prefer to do all of this within the mix itself. And it's very simple how I do this. Engineers have been doing this for decades upon decades. I just make sure that each of my low frequency instruments has their own spot, their own unique spot within the mix. So for example, for me, my kick drum sits lowest in the mix. Then up next would be my bass guitar. And then above that would be my rhythm guitars, and then snare drums, lead guitars, vocals. And then at the very, very top will be my cymbals and overheads. So to put it in another way, my kick drum lives really from 30 Hertz to around 50 Hertz or 60 Hertz. My bass guitar lives from 60 Hertz to 80 Hertz. Then my rhythm guitars live from 80 Hertz to 100 Hertz, so on and so forth. And I accomplish all of this simply by using high pass filters. I have tried in the past, when I first got into mixing, using some of these, in like ozone or something where you pan, your low end in the center and only allow specific frequencies to live in the center. But what I found in my own experience is that I achieved the best results using the method I just described, and that's just using basic, simple, high pass filters in the mix. I master my own work, and to be honest with you, if you get your mix right at the source within the mix itself, mastering is not really rocket science. It's just a matter of that final 5% that you're adding to your already polished mix. So that's my opinion. I have nothing against this process. If you know anyone that achieves great results with this process, more power to them. For me, it's never really done much. Almost like with stereo widening plugins, I never use stereo widening plugins. I used to when I first started out. And again, the more I progress as an engineer, producer, and mixer, the simpler and simpler my approach becomes, because at the end of the day, it really comes down to the fundamentals. So hopefully this helps, and thank you so much for this excellent question. Okay, and our final question here comes from Mr. K14. Just a quick question. Should we limit or clip the master bus while mastering? Like, what's the major difference? I tried both recently. Most of the times I just limit heavily. Just tried clipping and it's good. A bit different, but in what way? I don't have an answer. What's the major point? Can anyone answer? Okay, so to put it simply, again, much like with the other two questions, I do not clip my master bus. I just prefer to use a little bit of limiting in the mastering phase. For me, the magic of two bus processing is doing a little bit across multiple processors. In other words, I might use a little bit of console saturation or console emulation, then a little bit of mix bus compression, then a little bit of multi-band compression, and then finally a little bit of limiting. I do not intentionally clip my master bus, but there's nothing wrong with this. As a matter of fact, some mastering engineers intentionally digitally clip A to D converters, high-end A to D converters, in order to lop off transient in a much more natural way that limiting doesn't really offer. Now, some people like the sound of this, other people find it to sound a little harsh. From what I've heard, I'm not too crazy about it. To me, I hear the distortion and it's a little harsh to me. I prefer to just have my mix, again, dialed in through my multiple processors on my two bus. And I end up with a nice loud master that you don't hear any clipping on. In other words, it's loud in a very analog way. And that's the way that I prefer to work. But with that being said, if you're clipping your mix and you like the sound of it, have at it. There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone has their own unique taste and preferences. And if you like the sound of a clipped mix more than a limited mix, by all means, again, have at it. But just remember, you're gonna wanna make sure you limit any overs in the mastering phase. And that's where a high quality limiter like Ozone, for example, comes into play. So K14, thank you so much for your excellent question, and let me know how that works out for you on your future productions. So I would just like to shout out and thank everyone for submitting this excellent group of questions. And if you sent me a question specifically through email and I haven't gotten to it yet, just be patient. I'll definitely get to it within one of these videos in this series. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. If you're interested in some Frightbox swag, we've got t-shirts, mugs, and a ton of other cool stuff on the way. There's a link below to the Frightbox merch store in this video's description. And again, if you're looking to improve the sound of your mixes with the gear and plugins you already have, you can have direct access right now to my crisp and clear heavy mix formula. You get an EQ and compression mixing cheat sheet, private mixing tutorials for each of the main instruments within heavy production, and multi-track downloads that go along with each tutorial so you can mix along with me. Again, you could have direct instant access for absolutely free. There's a link below in this video's description. And until next time, happy mixing.